The router cuts wood joints and decorative edges, basically. So I could use it to put a groove on the edge of a board or through a board, like a dado or a rabbet, so boards can interconnect. I can also use it to put a round over or some sort of fancy edge on my board. The first rule with the router is to make sure the switch is off before you insert the plug into an outlet. Switch is totally covered here, but there is an on-off switch on the machines. We want to make sure that's off. If some of the machines, I've actually labeled it on them, nice and big, it says off to make it really obvious and easy to see. Number 2, be sure the collet chuck is tight and the bit secure. The collet chuck is this thing inside the machine there. That's what holds the bit in. We want to make sure that's tight. The time that it's most important to check it is when you're changing it, right? You want to make sure you tighten it back in there. We tend to not change the bits too often because we're lucky here at school to have a bunch of routers. So we put a bit in, make sure it's tight, and we just leave it in there. If you're working with a router at home, you probably have multiple bits and one router, whereas we have multiple bits and multiple routers. We don't have to change the bits all the time. But number 3, make sure your workpiece is clamped and rigidly held to the table. You have options. You could use the bench dog and the bench vise, right? You remember those from middle school? You could use a clamp. A lot of people go and get the trigger clamps. I don't recommend these. They're not that strong. They don't grip that hard. So I don't usually use these guys for holding things with the router. I would rather use something like the F-clamps. Okay. That covers number 3. Make sure the workpiece is clamped and rigidly held and the area of travel is free of obstructions. There's nothing here for the router to hit except for the clamp, so at some point I may have to stop and move the clamp. Number 4, hold the router with 2 hands. So if you're using the little laminate trimmer router, this is a one-handed tool. Most of the routers are two-handed tools. They have 2 handles on them. Okay? You want to use 2 hands, that way you have good control. Number 5, do not force or jam the work. Okay? If something is not working right, the bit is getting stuck, it's not working, don't push harder. Stop, let's take a look. Maybe the router's bumping into the clamp and you don't see it. Maybe the bit is so long it's just dragging on the table. Maybe the knot or something sticks up and you're bumping against that. Who knows? But don't just keep pushing harder. Let's take a look. Number 6, check the depth of cut. Okay? This router bit right here is not sticking up very high. That's not going to cut through pretty much anything. But sometimes we have a router bit that sticks out pretty far, and we want to make sure we're not going to cut all the way through and into the table. That is why the table has some of the marks that are in it from over the years getting beat up. We want to try and avoid that. So number 7, always make a test cut. If you have spent hours on your project, right? You have glued up this beautiful piece of wood for the top to something, you want to cut something into it. Don't let that be the first time you use the router, okay? Don't let it be the first time you use this particular router and this particular bit. Try it out in a test piece. Make sure it's going to make the cut exactly the way you want. Number 8, disconnect the router from power when you are going to make adjustments. Do not have it plugged in. The router could turn on while your hands are in there or your tools are in there. Number 9, the proper direction for feed when you're doing the outside is to move from left to right. If you have a hole cut in the inside of a board, like a slot for a handle or something like that, that's the time that you get to go right to left. So the first router I have here is the laminate trimmer. It's a small router. The bit in it does roundovers. Okay? I would never put my hand anywhere near this blade while it's on, so I'm using a pen right now. It has the little guide bearing. The blade is down there. The blade looks like a little curve, and that's what it does to the wood. It puts a little curve on it. So I'm going to run this around the board here. I've instantly made a mistake. And this did not come out super smooth because the bearing on the bottom of the bit was dragging on the table. This often happens when you're doing outside edges, and I generally recommend you hang the board over the edge. So I'm going to readjust this. I did this on purpose to kind of show you something there. Okay, now when I run it, I'm going to get a smoother cut. Right now I have little bumpity bumps. I don't know if you can see them. Bump, bump, bump. So. And as soon as I get around the corner, I run back into the same problem where it's on the table. So sometimes I actually have to put the whole board like hanging way off the edge. That's why you need a really strong clamp. The next router I want to use has a bigger roundover bit, and this one's set a little bit deeper. This one actually makes a little bit of a step and the roundover. So I'm going to do a little section here so you can see the difference. You may notice I set the routers on their tops all the time. You don't really want the bit banging on the table. So when I'm not using it, I set it up in the air like that, and then when I go to use it, I flip it over and hold it. Now when I start cutting, I don't want the bit touching the wood to start. I want it back a little bit, all right? I don't want that to be making contact when I start it. Okay, so this bit is set. It makes a little bit of a step and then a roundover compared to the regular roundover we had before. I also have the rabbiting bit, which this one actually makes a wood joint. A rabbet is a groove, like an L-shaped groove on the edge of a board. This bit is a big square looking, has a big square looking edge to it. That cuts off a square looking notch. So I'm going to do that also. I'm going to rearrange my clamp here, I think, just because I'm trying not to cut over top of all my cuts, because I want you guys to be able to see all 3 cuts I've made. And you can kind of imagine if this went all the way around the board. So this is used, the number one time I use this rabbiting bit is when I'm making a picture frame. I put that rabbet on the back. There are other times where I use it for other things. But now, you may have noticed that I went back and forth a few times. I was taking a gentle cut and then going in for a deeper cut. So over a series of small cuts, I was able to put a rabbet there. Doing several cuts helps keep the bit cool so the wood doesn't burn too much. It also keeps us from wearing out the router so fast. You can see I need to go back here and finish this if I was using this as a finished piece. Doing freehand signs, I don't see that done a ton as a high school woodworking project, but it's part of the culture here at Morrisville. Kids were into it when I first started working here. There are signs all over our school that have been made this way on teachers' doors and things like that. So it's just one of the things we do a lot. I don't necessarily see people do it a lot, but it's cool. And you can, if you get good at it, if you practice your router handwriting, you can do really nice stuff. It really starts with how well you label the wood, though. I like to use a ruler and draw some lines on here to make sure everything's straight. and I'm just going to freehand this for the sake of the demo. But I like to always write out my letters first. When you are using the router, if you're practicing, it's always good to practice on the same type of wood you're going to actually use for your project, because some woods react differently to the router. Some woods are harder than others. It's also good to practice some curved letters and some straight letters. So I tell people, make a W, make an L, make an S, make an O. I think the O is one of the hardest ones because you got to get back to where you started, and you don't have like the stem to hide that. Like I could do the G, and if I kind of goof it up as I do the tail, I might be able to cover like that little seam a little. So anyway, I'm going to clamp this board down nice and tight. I might not be able to do all the letters in one shot because the base of the router may hit this clamp. So I always try and look at that ahead of time. Oh, I can do the D. Okay. Sometimes you can't do the first letter or the second letter. This is also a reason why I like to leave my piece of wood long. If I'm making a sign, I don't like to cut it to the size I think I want it to be first. I actually like it to be a little long and do the lettering. That way I have room for clamping, and I'll just trim it down when I'm done. All right, so I've checked that the machine's off. I've plugged it in. Like before, I don't want the bit to come in contact with the wood before I start, so when I kick it on, I keep it tilted a little bit. All right, that way I can then lay it down. I can plunge it in. You do want to be careful doing that, and anytime you lift the router to switch letters, you have to be careful to lift it straight up, or you can kind of leave a trail with the edge of the router bit from letter to letter. So, on.